It's scarily true that the most powerful psychological tricks can be used against us to make good people do bad things.
5 persons, including actress Sharon Tate, were found dead at the home of Miss Tate and her husband, screen director Roman Polanski.
So in this video, we will be looking at the realm of persuasion that some call brainwashing, to explore the psychological tricks that cults, sociopaths, and manipulative others use to make good people do those bad things. Hopefully these red flags prevent you from falling victim either in a toxic relationship or from a predatory organization. So with that said, here's a brief background on the 3 main groups we're going to be analyzing. And warning, these are morbid topics. I'm going to avoid going deep into the details, but there will be some, so just a heads up if that's not something you want to know more about. First off, the People's Temple was run by Jim Jones from the 1950s up until 1978. Jones eventually began to abuse his power, which culminated in the order for every member of the congregation to drink Flavor Aid laced with cyanide, all while living in a commune in Guyana, and in total, 918 people died. Second is Charles Manson, who formed a counterculture group in California in the late 1960s called the Manson family. He was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder when his followers killed 7 people. And though the prosecution determined that Manson never explicitly ordered those murders, he was convicted of the conspiracy and sentenced to life in prison. And lastly, we have Keith Raniere, the founder of NXIVM. And though this was billed as an executive success program, deeper layers of the organization involved the taking of female slaves for sexual and labor exploitation. Many of these women were enthusiastically recruited by other women inside the group, and Raniere was convicted in 2019 on several charges, including sex trafficking. So let's get to how seemingly good people wind up in these groups, doing things so destructive for them and for others, sometimes their own family, and how you can avoid these exploitations in your own life. These can be complicated concepts, and watching this video more than once can help you to understand them better. First off, these groups can only rewrite normal behavioral codes by separating you and replacing the family unit. This means that groups are most likely to target people with weak family ties, as those make for the easiest converts. This Manson family member explains.
I believe that I was desperately seeking someone that I could love and hold on to and call my own. That somehow my dad leaving had left a space there.
If, like this woman, you don't have a strong family unit, you're likely to be more prone to loneliness, insecurity, and potentially self-worth issues, which means that clever manipulators can use simple compliments to overwhelm these types of people with a feeling that they are finally loved.
When we made love, all I remember is just crying and crying to this man. I mean, it was like, because he said, "Oh, you're beautiful." I couldn't believe that. I just started crying.
For someone who feels this lack, the promise of love and a family is an insanely powerful motivator, one that could make them change everything in their life. So cult leaders and sociopaths explicitly offer a family, often using the terms brother, sister, mother, father, or children. And you hear this emphasized in conversations as well as in song, for instance.
Everyone, we're a happy family, yes we are.
But it's not enough for some leader to just offer a makeshift family. For full indoctrination, these types of groups need to isolate people from their birth families and whatever other support structure they may have. So Jim Jones, for instance, was only able to get people to drink cyanide because he'd moved them to an isolated community in Guyana, apart from relatives who would have shut all of this down. And he cut off contact with all of those other people, many of whom were petitioning the government to shut Jones down, and made sure that the only news that his congregation received was from his broadcast on the loudspeaker all day long.
There was a speaker system, and only Jim spoke on it, and it went 24 hours a day.
The United States is calling for the removal of all blacks and Indians, so is England.
We had no other radio or TV or communication with parents or any kind of, update that could show us really that there's a whole other thing going on besides what Jim was interpreting for us.
Similarly, Charles Manson and his group lived together in an isolated ranch, and NXIVM pressured their members to move to the community in New York as they became more involved. This made it so much easier for the leader to control the social consensus, which is to say, they could make it seem that everyone in the world held certain beliefs, that there was no reasonable dissenting opinion, when in fact, that was just what everyone in the world they created believed. And that way, they they could apply social pressure most effectively. And this brings us to the second psychological trick that is popular amongst these groups, and it's lingo, or jargon, which is often used to disguise what is truly happening. For instance, in NXIVM, people who disagreed with the leader Raniere were not simply people who disagreed. They were labeled as suppressives who had undergone something called the fall. And by controlling the specific language, Raniere was able to control the connotation of what was happening. Similarly, when Jim Jones had the people poison themselves and their families, he said this:
We didn't commit suicide. We committed an act of revolutionary suicide protesting the conditions of an inhumane world.
Far less sinister, but still something you might encounter in your own life, are self-help organizations that make their graduates their unpaid sales force. They pressure them as part of the program to get their friends and family to pay to sign up, but the word selling is highly discouraged. This process needs to be called enrollment. Again, this controls the connotation, and it sounds like NXIVM used this specific word.
I've been talking to different people about it, and like different actors and things like that, enrolling them in the idea of coming and participating and seeing what you've created.
Now, to be clear, there is nothing inherently wrong with specialized terminology or the use of metaphor within a group, and that is provided that you can have an open and honest discussion about why certain terms are necessary. For instance, to freely ask why we use the term enrollment, and that's not just sales in disguise. And if you're enjoying this video and you want to see more, you can go ahead and hit the subscribe button, or if you've done that, the notification bell, just to ensure that you never miss another upload. But of course, this brings us to the third red flag of these groups, which is that they demonize the asking of questions that threaten their authority. Now, sometimes this is done when people verbally desire something that opposes the doctrine, and you can hear Jim Jones berating someone who had asked to go home from Guyana in this clip.
By Christmas, do you want to be gone?
Yeah, well, if
By Christmas, do you want to be gone? By Christmas, do you want to be gone?
I would ask you, could I go home to make a trip to see my people?
It's blasphemy. It's blasphemy to talk about going back when you have not been given any approval. Do you want to go home?
No.
Well, then be seated and shut your mouth and don't be in my face anymore.
But this question demonization is at its absolute worst when the censorship is something that is internalized. That means that you're not asking the question out loud, you're shutting it down in your own head. The social pressure can become so intense that people judge themselves anytime some sort of doubt enters their thoughts. This NXIVM investigator shares how oftentimes members were taught to shut down their own critical thinking on purpose.
One of the things they did was to say, you need to ignore your gut instinct. You need to ignore the part of your mind that's saying this is not good, because that's what's holding you back in your life. But what that does is it takes away your critical thought. If you start to question what's going on here, there's another part of your brain that starts to kick in and say, oh no, this is my issue. I always question everything. That's what's holding me back in terms of my personal growth.
So if you find yourself in any kind of a situation where asking questions feels like some sort of a violation, be wary. For instance, if you're asking about a contract that you're looking to sign and the person across from you says, "Are you saying that you don't trust me?" you might feel overcome with guilt, but there is no need to feel that guilt at your own skepticism. Recognize that just about any situation, you can remain unconvinced without being a bad, untrusting, or stupid human being. Don't let people pressure you into removing that skepticism before you feel comfortable. Now, in addition to demonizing questions, these groups often reward the opposite, which is our fourth psychological trick of the video, and that's to be on the lookout for any games or tests that primarily reward obedience. You can take this example from the Manson family that encouraged members to shut off any self-directed thought and simply follow Charles Manson's lead.
One of his things was to stop you during the day, and he'd put your palms up to his, and then he'd move them in any direction that he could. Or he'd make a series of faces, and then you were supposed to try to keep up with them. And the whole thing was always geared toward just complete mirroring of him.
This type of obedience training conditions people, again, to ignore any personal critical thinking. Obedience and blind loyalty become the highest virtue, and independent thought is demonized as selfish, sinful, or fearful. Jim Jones conducted various tests with his members, doing a mock fake poisoning where the faithful were then praised for being true, and he later was effective in having his congregation members turn in any loved ones that were thinking of leaving the commune in Guyana, which is a testament to blind obedience winning over even family ties.
A father would turn in a son, a husband would turn in a wife, a small child would turn in a parent. The most forbidden thing to express was to leave.
In these situations, the willingness to blindly obey can be compounded by the fact that your own desire to be fair is often used against you, which is the fifth psychological trick to be aware of, a feeling that you owe it to somebody to behave in a certain way. Sociopaths can be excellent at triggering this feeling through fake reciprocity. Basically, we all have a desire to be fair, and they exploit this as a vulnerability. Manson, for instance, swore that he'd do things for his followers that he probably wouldn't have, but you can imagine that these type of statements made his followers feel as if they owed him in return.
And it was very realistic. I would die for you. And then the questions would begin, would you die for me?
And at NXIVM, anyone who doubted Raniere was reminded how much they owed to him.
If you question Keith Raniere, the hits the fan.
Like
you
what?
You are prideful. How dare you? Don't you realize you owe everything to him?
This kind of fake reciprocity can unfortunately be common even outside of these types of predatory organizations. If you're walking down a crowded city street, offered a CD, a rose, or a knickknack, and then expected to pay for it, you've encountered this. Or if you find yourself in a relationship with someone who speaks often about what they would do for you, but you've never really seen it, there's a chance that they are engaging your sense of reciprocity in a way that could ultimately be damaging. Now, I hope that these tips have been useful, but of course we need to point out that these red flags are everywhere in our society. Religions, the military, college sororities and fraternities, self-help programs, even well-meaning friends often check several of these boxes, and for essentially the same reason, because these psychological tricks are how you instill new ways of being into large groups of people reliably, and that behavior that's being instilled can be good or bad. So when it comes to sorting the good from the bad pressures, there is no guaranteed shortcut to sort them out. Sometimes you need to be pushed outside of your comfort zone by people who have your best interests at heart, and sometimes you need to get the heck out. So the best long-term strategy is to establish your own bedrock sense of self-esteem and self-love. Those foundations make it less likely that you're going to go along to be accepted by a group, and more likely that you will only go along with those things that are in the service of the highest good of your own life. Now, if self-love is something that you think you might be a bit shaky on, one of the best primers that I know of is called Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. I've recommended it in the past, but it has now been updated for 2020, and it essentially expands on it so it's got 3 times the content, including specific practices. I truly believe that self-love is one of the ultimate goals of life. Hopefully that's the place that everything I teach leads, and if you want to check out this particular primer, you can do so for free, courtesy of this video's sponsor, Audible. When you start your free 30-day trial of Audible today, you get 1 free audiobook. I recommend Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It, and 2 Audible originals. And you can do that at audible.com/charisma or by texting charisma to 500-500. And if you've got a commute to work or you need something to listen to while you're doing house chores, I seriously think that one of the most important things that you do for your life is work on self-love. And as I said, Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It is an excellent primer. So I hope that you do decide to check it out. And if so, take advantage of the free trial with Audible, which you can do for free today at audible.com/charisma or by texting charisma to 500-500. Either way, I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.